call Claire Adamson, Convener of Education and Skills, to be followed by Gordon Lyndhurst. Ms Adamson, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I welcome this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Education and Skills Committee, and I'd like to pay tribute to the support of my clerks and my committee members, and I hope I can do their commitment and diligence justice today. The committee has integrated the scrutiny of budget lines and associated outcomes into its inquiries throughout the financial year. The issues covered range from attainment and achievement of school-aged children experiencing poverty, developing the young workforce and instrumental music tuition. And today I have written to the Scottish Government seeking details on the budget lines in support of the implementation of the Scottish National Standardised Assessments. The committee also undertook scrutiny of the draft budget this month, taking evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills, John Swinney, and just for clarity, Presiding Officer, can I say that any reference to the Cabinet Secretary is to the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills and not the Cabinet Secretary who is responding today. I would like to highlight additional support for learning in school education, a significant priority for the committee. The committee published its inquiry, which included a focus on mainstreaming in May 2017. The importance of sufficient resourcing of the policy, set against a marked rise in the number of pupils recognised as having an additional support need in some areas, were underlying themes of the inquiry report. Specific recommendations include a financial review of local authority spend, improvements to the baseline data that effective scrutiny of policy implementation needs to be based on, and qualitative research into the experiences of young people with additional support needs to assess the reality of the implementation of this policy. The committee welcomed the movement from the Government in response to some of its recommendations, particularly in its agreement to commission qualitative research. However, scrutiny of provision of ASN remains a priority for the committee going forward. In November 2018, we held a session with the Government statisticians and policy officials on the collation of data and staff census on school support staff, specifically in the support of children with additional support needs. Changes in reporting reflected inconsistency in data collection across local authorities. The committee would seek clarity on the number of support staff working in ASN previously and currently not available accurately. The committee has looked at funding allocations. The Scottish Children's Services Coalition suggested that there could be ring-fenced budgets in support of additional support needs. The committee invited a perspective from the Government on this idea. I appreciate the arguments made, including by COSLA during the evidence in our committee's inquiry into music tuition, on guarding against an over-reliance on targeted or ring-fenced funding over funding policy through core local authority budget allocations, although a report also highlighted the success of the Youth Music Initiative, which is a government-led initiative delivered by COSLA and local authorities and thoroughly welcomed by all those who took part in it. The committee also had an inquiry into attainment and achievement of children experiencing poverty, including a focus on the cost of the school day. The committee received evidence, including from the Children's Poverty Action Group, suggesting charging for elements of the curriculum were relatively commonplace. A musical tuition report published on Tuesday highlights the need to ensure that no charges are attached to any activity that is required to contribute towards an SQA exam. In general, we are seeking clarity as to what can and cannot be charged for under the curriculum, and more information is required on the extent of such practices in local authorities. The committee has also been concerned about consistency of approach across local authorities, and it continues to be a theme across all of our inquiries. The committee welcomes certain moves to ensure minimum levels of support for children and their families. In particular, the Scottish Government announcement towards the end of poverty and attainment inquiry that had agreed with local authorities that a minimum level of school clothing grant of £100 per year should be implemented and regularly reviewed, and this was a welcome step. The Poverty and Attainment Inquiry also looked at the pupil equity funding and attainment challenge funding, and the draft budget has this standing at £180 million of provision. This included looking at the extent to which indicators of deprivation can be relied upon as the basis for targeted funding allocations. For example, the limitations of using free school meal uptake as a criteria for the allocation of pupil equity funding. And the committee welcomed the Scottish Government's acceptance of the committee recommendations in this area, when the Cabinet Secretary made it clear in evidence that he was amenable to finding a better approach, and the committee was pleased to hear from the Cabinet Secretary last week that the intention is to have the work completed on a new deprivation indicator in time for the next financial year, although we recognise that the implementation of such a new indicator will take a little longer. The Cabinet Secretary also confirmed last week that teachers employed under PEF are employed using the principle of additionality. It needs to be used for a new purpose aimed at reducing the poverty-related attainment gap, and the need for in-depth evaluation of PEF projects was also highlighted by the committee. This year, the committee looked at the underspends of PEF in local authorities and noted variation in levels across local authorities of that underspend. Importantly, the Cabinet Secretary confirmed that the underspends can be carried over and be spent by schools into the next financial year. The committee will return to underspend levels next year to assess whether the underspend has reduced at the reported level of 40% on the average across all local authorities for 2017-2018. A significant priority for the Government, of course, is in higher and further education. And we explored with the Cabinet Secretary the real time increase in the revenue funding of about 1.3% to £600 million for colleges, and then the intention that this is used to cover the costs of national bargaining and harmonisation. In relation to higher education, the valued status of Scotland's universities and the importance of protecting funding was raised with the Cabinet Secretary. Although the funding is over £1 billion, it is a real terms drop of 1.79% in government funding for universities. And the universities have suggested that they expect around £18 million of Barnett consequentials resulting from an increased research spending in the UK, and are requesting that this be considered to be allocated back to Scottish universities. An assurance was also sought that the Scottish Government funds that are currently used to support EU students would remain in the university sector should we exit the EU, particularly in a no-Brexit deal situation. The committee has also questioned why Education Scotland's starting budget at the beginning of the financial year is substantially lower than is required. The Cabinet Secretary set out the logic for in-year transfers and highlighted that the budgeting approach is not specific to Education Scotland and also applies to Skills Development Scotland. However, the committee recognises that Education Scotland, during a time of reorganisation, change and increased responsibilities, should have as much certainty as possible of its funding levels going forward. I'm running out of time, Presiding Officer, but other areas I would like to highlight is the new budget would provide the scope to deliver £10 million for compensation for survivors of abuse. The £500 million that's been committed into the expansion of early years and healthcare, early years and childcare is of extreme interest to us, especially the use of private providers, and we will be watching the development of that policy with interest, and also funding to support the achievement of positive designations for care-experienced young people. The committee welcomes the opportunity to have whole year inline scrutiny of the budget, and unfortunately I've not been able to mention everything, Presiding Officer, but I shall leave it there.
Thank you very much.